Alright YouTube, so most of you being Bethesda players, you probably know who MrMattyPlays is. Well, a little bit ago, about a month or so ago, he dropped a review for Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age, and I disagree with a lot of his shit, so I wanted to break it down. Alright, so first off, does anybody ever do this? Does anybody ever, like, review reviews? Like, I don't know if that's a thing on YouTube, because if it's not, well, it's fucking about to be. Now, before we actually get into it, I don't have a problem with MrMattyPlays. I've actually talked about it a few times on the channel. He's actually legitimately the reason I started my YouTube channel. A couple of years ago, he was the only guy I knew of doing Fallout videos, like, every single day. And, you know, any kind of, like, leaks or any kind of hype for Fallout 4, he was doing videos on that. And he was the only guy I knew of. And I was like, you know what? I'm really into the Fallout series. Why don't I start a YouTube channel as well? And that's legitimately why I'm talking to you today. So there's like no personal issues or personal beef here. Me and the guy have never even actually exchanged words. Now, part of the reason why I'm doing this video is because I've played a majority of the main Final Fantasy series. You know, I've played 1, 2, and 3. I played Crisis Core and 7. I played 8, 9, 10, 10, 2. I played 12, the first 13, and of course Final Fantasy 15, and some of the branch-off games here and there like Tactics, Tactics Advanced, Dissidia. So I think I can give a good perspective on what is and isn't good about a Final Fantasy game. Actually, really quick though, before we get started, obviously somebody's review of a game is entirely subjective and it is their opinion. It doesn't mean that it's fact, and my responses to his points in the video aren't fact either, it's just how I feel. For starters, the video has done very poorly in terms of views and like ratio. A lot of people disagree with him. You can check the comment sections. A lot of people disagree with him because a lot of people disagree with him in the comments. And I think part of why the video has underperformed is because he gave away his review in the title by saying my personal worst Final Fantasy so far. You're giving away your review in the title. That just doesn't make any damn sense. Like, we already know going into it, you don't think it's a good game. It's apparently the worst Final Fantasy you ever played. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, the low views could be because it's an older game, and like Final Fantasy is not what his channel's about. He's mostly a Bethesda YouTuber. Of course, he does other games as well, but he's mostly known for being a Bethesda YouTuber. But regardless, 5,000 views is a joke for somebody as big as him with 315,000 subscribers. You should easily be pulling in more than 5,000 views on any video you upload at that size.
Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with my review for Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. Now, I've played Final Fantasy 3, 7, Crisis Core, Type 0, 15, 13.1, 13.2, and in my opinion, this entry in the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy XII, is absolutely the worst out of all those entries I've played.
First problem I have is that he's saying Final Fantasy XII is worse than 13 and 13.2, whenever the entire series of like Final Fantasy 13 are considered like the worst of all the Final Fantasies. 13 is like the Fallout 4 of the Final Fantasy community. They're just fucking bad. I played Final Fantasy 13 and I hated 13 so much that I didn't even care to try out the sequels. Also, my dude, you haven't played really any Final Fantasies. Like 7 and Crisis Core, those are good ones, of course, but you haven't played 8 or 9, which are great ones. You also haven't played 10. Like, you haven't played Final Fantasy X? I've never even heard of that. Who hasn't played that game?
For reference, every Final Fantasy game is its own universe, its own story. It just has the Final Fantasy DNA. So you can hop in at 12, 13, you can hop in all the way back at 4. Wherever you want to hop in, you can.
Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but you gotta be a little more specific with that shit, because some of the Final Fantasies have actual sequels. You know, 7 has a prequel, Crisis Core, then you have 10 and 10.2, you have 13, 13.2, 13.3, and you can hop in, obviously, and play those sequels without having played the originals, but you probably won't know what the fuck's going on, like, story-wise. So, you gotta be a little more specific with that. Not all of them are just standalone universes.
Now let's get into the review. A story can quickly become confusing and even overwhelming when too many important characters are introduced in a quick span of time, and they aren't properly flushed out. Final Fantasy XII does that by tossing them all in your face and leaving you to put the pieces together.
Really, Final Fantasy XII's story was like overwhelming for you or confusing? Like, I played this game when it first came out in 2006, so I was like 15 at the time, maybe 16, depending on when it actually came out. And I never had a problem with that. That was like 10 years ago, bro. I was like a kid. Like, you're a grown adult and you can't comprehend the story of Final Fantasy XII. It's an old PS2 game, man. This shit ain't complicated. Also, if this story is like overwhelming or confusing for you, how do you play any other games at all that have legitimately good stories that are actually complicated?
Normally, I like a story that encourages the player to figure it out rather than directly telling it to them, but this is a case where the characters aren't compelling and give the players too few details as to why they're actually important to the story, and then the developers expect said player to care.
Look, I'm not even going to defend the character development of 12 or even the story, because to be honest, it wasn't that great of a story, but again, as a kid, I wasn't struggling with figuring out which characters were important for what they're doing, how important they were to the story, where they fit into the story. Like, it was pretty damn simple to me. Like, to be honest, it is one of the most linear stories of any of the Final Fantasies I've ever played. Like, it's not that complicated of a story. All you need to know is who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and those are not hard to figure out.
The story is a fairly standard tale of an empire suppressing tons of surrounding nations to expand its power as a group of unlucky heroes fall into place and try to build a resistance against this big bad empire. You'll travel the land collecting crystals of power that have the ability to wipe out large amounts of forces at a time to hopefully give your side the upper hand in an otherwise losing battle. What Final Fantasy XII admirably attempts to focus on is the personal side of combat and war as you go through betrayal, twists and turns, but none of them really land as hard as they could have because the game doesn't flush out its cast enough to have the player invested. It's not until the end where only the truly important characters stand and remain that there is some actually interesting things going on, but in my opinion, it was far too late.
That was a long part, but he was doing a good job of explaining the story, and to be honest, the way he explained it, it sounded like a pretty damn good story to me. That's just my opinion. Now, one of the reasons why I think the story in Final Fantasy XII was not that great is you gotta remember this was the first time, other than Final Fantasy XI, where they stepped away from turn-based. 10 was the last turn-based. This was technically the first step into open world, if we're not including the MMO that is Final Fantasy XI. So they were focused on a lot of other things in the story of this game because they were trying so much new stuff. And I'm not necessarily saying that makes up for the lack of a story, but the point being there was just so much more going on with 12.
For all the story complaints I have, I was actually pretty satisfied with the ending. Despite that godforsaken tower at the end, scaling dozens and dozens of floor is not fun in any game, no matter what series it is, and I started to get flashbacks to Tartarus from Persona 3.
I personally thought that the Pharos was a pretty cool location. There's 100 floors going up, but you don't actually go up 100 floors you don't go up like a floor at a time. Usually a staircase counts as a floor, so you go up it pretty quick. It wasn't that complicated or confusing, man. If anything, the Great Crystal in the ancient city of Gyrovagan was a hell of a lot more complicated to navigate because you didn't even have a map you could use, and you had to memorize each location and which doorway you came through at all times.
A bit about the main character Vaughn. He is widely regarded as one of, if not the worst Final Fantasy protagonist ever. Now, I knew nothing about Final Fantasy XII going into this game. It's my first time with this entry, and I thought maybe it was something with his personality or whatever. Maybe people were just exaggerating, but it was the last reason I expected. He genuinely serves no purpose. Vaughn is only involved in this story because he bumped into Balthier through sheer luck and just things kind of worked out. The story does nothing to make Vaughn interesting, and I'm not even exaggerating, dude. Like, this is 100% Ash's story, and she should have been the main character through and through. I don't know why Vaughn was really in the game. Like I said, he just kind of stumbled on what was happening, and after that, they kicked him to the side and then let the rest of the cast tell the story.
Now, I will agree with pretty much all of that. Vaughn is one of the worst characters ever in Final Fantasy, in my personal opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion. He's a poorly designed character. He looks fucking stupid. He has a weak-ass voice. He's just not somebody you can really get behind. Now, by all technicality, he is absolutely the main character. He's the one you start playing with at the very beginning of the game, and you kind of see the story through his eyes mostly. But this game, you're not limited to having to use him like you are in some other different Final Fantasy games. By the end of the game, there are 6 characters to use, and you can use a team of 1 to 3 of any of the characters that are available. There might be some segments in the game where you're forced to use certain characters. I honestly don't remember. It's been a long time since I played the game. But you're not forced to use Vaughn. He's not at the front of the story at all times. He's only the main character if you want him to be.
Anyway, that's all I have to say about the story. I can see why some like it. There's a ton of CGI cutscenes, so I really feel like when Final Fantasy XII first released back then, it was really a super awesome looking game in the sense of how much tech it was boasting, but in the terms of video game itself, I have to say I really wasn't impressed because some might be thinking perhaps the gameplay is its savior, and it's definitely not. Now,
so first he says the story's bad, now he's saying that the gameplay is bad. He's said the graphics are pretty good, or at least they're probably good for the time, which he is absolutely right. But, you know, apparently according to him, not one redeeming thing about the game. The story's bad, the gameplay's bad. Like, what the fuck, dude? There's nothing left. That's all games are, right? The story or the fucking gameplay. The gameplay of this game was actually good. I mentioned previously how it was kind of open world. This was the first Final Fantasy where the enemies were constantly in front of you, like that you could see them and you could choose to fight them, run away, take a different route, whatever you wanted to do. This is kind of where they got the battle system for Final Fantasy XV. If not for Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy XV might not have the battle system that it does.
The Zodiac Age version of Final Fantasy XII introduces some changes compared to the original, and one of them is this new job system.
Technically wrong again, you see. Everything that is new for us on Zodiac Age was actually released back in 2007 on Final Fantasy XII International Zodiac Job System for Japan. Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age is just a remaster of this game with improved technical support, trophy support, remastered soundtrack, and some new tracks. So while this stuff is technically new for us, it's not really new at all. Something as simple as a Wikipedia search would have told you this, man. Maybe use that in your next review.
And leveling up characters is absolutely the most fun part of this game, but in order to level up, you have to participate in combat, and Final Fantasy XII's gameplay is, in my humble opinion, borderline laughable. It relies on what is called the Gambit system. You essentially set up what are programming commands such as if health is less than 70%, someone will cast Cure, or who to target at what time in combat, depending on how much HP the enemy has, what status effects he has, and you can chain together different attacks and whatnot. And when you have all your Gambits set up, that's it. You run around the world, the Gambit system takes over the fighting for you. The game quite literally removes you as an active participant from the combat, which has you running from cutscene to cutscene pretty much.
This is absolutely one of the funniest parts of his review, man. He says that the gameplay and the combat are borderline laughable because of the Gambit system, and the game's kind of on autopilot. I guess completely ignoring the fact that you can turn the Gambit system off anytime you want to for any of the characters. You can choose to control each and every character. You can turn Gambits off completely for all 6 characters and choose each of their each action that they do during combat. You don't have to use Gambits. It's an entirely optional thing to the game. Like, you can set the combat to active or wait. So whenever you do the action button to attack or to initiate an attack during battle, you can, if it's on wait, it'll pause time, and you can go from character to character on your team and choose what their action is. Or you can have it on active and everything's still going on around you. You just gotta choose, you just gotta be fast with it. So his reason for the combat being bad is because he chose to turn Gambits on for everybody, set all of their Gambits, and chose to leave that shit on and let the characters fight for themselves instead of doing it himself. That's his reasoning. That's like legit so retarded. I chose to turn autopilot on, and the combat is bad because of autopilot. Like, what kind of reasoning is that?
And there is a ton of running. Imagine Final Fantasy XV without the regalia. You're just running from point A to point B. That's Final Fantasy XII pretty much. There is so much running that there is a footstep counter in the menu.
I don't think I've ever heard such bullshit in my life. The game is big. They provided a big open world, more or less, for you to explore for a PlayStation 2 game, and that is a problem because there's a lot of area to cover, a lot of area to run around. That is somehow an issue for him. How do you play any other games at all, ever?
Now, there is a fast-forward mechanic. Yes, the gameplay you've been watching isn't me making an error while editing or rendering this video. The game literally runs in a fast-forward mode of either ×2 or ×4 speed, depending on my choosing. Combat is slow in Final Fantasy XII, and not that type of slow like I'm not into strategy games. You guys should know by now. I love strategy games. It's just slow because you're waiting for this bar to fill up for the game to attack for you, and you're not doing anything to speed that process up except fast-forward it.
This is coming from somebody who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. Your attack speed is based on the weapon. Each and every weapon type in the game has different attack speeds. You also attack based on your character's actual speed as well. Also, certain characters are bad with certain weapons. For instance, Fran attacks slower with a bow than other characters, Balthier attacks slower with a gun than other characters, which is surprising because that's like their starting weapons. But see, you wouldn't know that stuff because you do not do proper research for your reviews. Also, the having to wait to attack thing, I think you're coming from the perspective of Final Fantasy XV, which is more of a button mash game. A majority of the Final Fantasies before 15 had wait time to attack. That's just kind of how it's always been since it was turn-based.
Then, once again, there's no reason to not fast forward because the combat, you're not doing anything anyways. So why not just get it over with? Same goes for running. You were doing so much of it, going from point A to point B, there's no sights to see, so why not fast forward through it?
So his reasoning for fast forwarding is because there's nothing to do or see when you run around, and there's so much running, and also combat is already automated, so why not fast forward? Again, he chooses to make combat automated instead of doing it himself. And there's actually quite a bit to do in Final Fantasy XII. There's actually a good amount of side quests, and there's a lot of secrets. There's actually parts of the map you can walk out of that aren't on your map. Like, there's hidden walls and things you can go through. But you wouldn't know that, right?
What I'm getting at is that in order for this game to properly function as an enjoyable video game, you need to play it at ×2 speed. And I don't know if when they were remastering this game, they thought to themselves, uh-oh, it's kind of flawed.
But see, in the International Zodiac Job System version of Final Fantasy XII back in 2007, they actually already had this additional speed option. This is not something new. They didn't add it to Zodiac Age because Final Fantasy XII sucks as much as you seem to think it does. That option was already there a decade ago. You don't have to try to use the increased speed thing as something that's bad. Final Fantasy IX, they moved that to the PS4 recently. That also has an additional speed option if you choose to use that. I bitched about it in that video. I don't agree with it, but it's for people if they want to use it.
It just kind of is baffling why they decided to pick this game out of all the Final Fantasy games to actually remaster, because I can see once again how back then this was a really cool thing, but it is aged so poorly. I mean,
for starters, you have zero idea how the game aged because you've said already in your review that you did not even play the original game, so you don't even know how it's aged in the slightest. Secondly, they chose to remaster this game because it had an international version. They did the exact same thing with 10. There was an international version of Final Fantasy X that had additional content that we did not have here in the US, so they remastered it with better graphics and added the additional content. They did the exact same thing with 12. And 12's a popular game. It took a lot of years for it to become popular. It's one of those kind of cult classics, if you want to call it that. It's not talked about amongst the other big ones like 7 and 6 and shit, but it is still a popular Final Fantasy. Also, remasters aren't necessarily meant to draw in new players. Obviously, that is kind of the goal, and it will bring in new players. But a remaster is you're taking an older game and making it a better version for the people who played it back then. It's for the nostalgia. It's meant for the older players.
The funnest part of any game is being an active participant in it, right? You want to be the one controlling the action or doing something about it, and the Gambit system removes all of that, where you literally will not touch a button on your controller for upwards of an hour.
If he mentions the Gambit system as a negative one more goddamn time, I might actually kill myself. You chose to use that. At this point, I'm starting to think he didn't even know you could turn the fuckers off.
I'm not exaggerating. I went through large stretches of this game just running from point A to point B. I didn't have to press anything. Playthroughs of this game are usually around the 50-hour mark with the original Final Fantasy XII, but that's not the case here. I finished in under 30 hours, and if that's not a testament to how much running there is and how slow the combat is, then I'm not quite sure what is.
So I guess what he's trying to say right there is that since he used the ×2 speed and finished the game in under 30 hours as opposed to the usual 50-hour playthroughs, that somehow justifies him saying the game's too big. Since when is a lengthy playthrough for a game a bad thing, dude? I don't understand his logic here. For some reason, because the game offers a lot of content, it takes upwards of 50 hours to beat the game, that's somehow a bad thing. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
To properly function, it has to be at 2x speed, and I could literally feel my attention span going away as I played this game because I was just going boom, 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 just fast forwarding through everything, not because I was in a rush, but because it was either that or really test my patience and almost double my play clock because I wanted to run a little bit more, because I wanted to wait for the bar to attack to fill a little bit more.
So he claims that the game has to be played in 2x speed. But because he's playing in 2x speed and has gambits on, he's fast forwarding through everything and losing his attention span when it comes to the game. But that's all his own fault. You chose to do that. You chose to play the game in fucking fast forward. That was your choice. The game has plenty to do, see, and explore. Plenty of hidden secrets, secret bosses. They even have a secret super boss with 50 million health that is a super hard fucking fight. But you didn't know that shit because you didn't really play the game at all. I played the game in fast forward mode and on autopilot, and here's why I do not like this game. Because you didn't even fucking play. You didn't even give it a fucking chance, man. All you did was shit all over this game the entire video. Which is why I had to make this review. I didn't make this kind of response video to the review because it was such a lazy attempt at a review, man. It actually pissed me off. Final Fantasy XII is such a great game, and you didn't even give it the slightest chance. And look, I'm not somebody who usually references ratings or scores or anything like that, but I just want to point out that Final Fantasy XII is generally received as a great game. It's highly rated by most people. And you're over here saying that, telling people to pass on it. It was awful. It was a bad game. Worst Final Fantasy you ever played. You are in the minority when you say that this is a bad game. You are wrong. Anyways, guys, that's where I'm going to end my review of his review, of MrMattyPlays' review of Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age. I had to make a response to this video. It was much longer than I planned, but it was necessary. There was so much more to break down than I realized once I started making the video. Final Fantasy XII is a fantastic game. I'll tell you not to pass on it. If I had a PlayStation 4, I would have already bought and been playing Zodiac Age. Final Fantasy XII falls in either my top 5 or top 10. I'm not exactly sure. I've never really done a Final Fantasy best games order because 7 is just my favorite. But it's definitely better than the 13 trilogy, I'll tell you that much. Anyways, guys, if you happen to make it this far, let me know your thoughts below. Where do you rate Final Fantasy XII? Have you even played it? Did you not play the original? Or are you picking up Zodiac Age? Let me know all your thoughts below. Anyways, if you guys went on to enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @TheDashingDavid. Links to my social networks are in the description. and in the outro. Later, guys.
Oh my god!
Till it comes to conclusions, all the things that we thought we were losing. I'm a ghost and you know this. That's why we broke up in the first place. 'Cause I want you.